My name is Emma. I'm standing in the Ridgeway Memorial ICU at 11 p.m. On a Thursday, my hands raw from washing under the warm water. In the mirror above the sink, I see my face with hazel eyes that don't match anyone in the family I grew up with, light brown hair that's foreign to them, and a jaw that belongs to a man I've never met and might never seek out. Just a few weeks ago, my life was turned upside down in a hospital chapel. I remember walking in, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. There were 23 relatives gathered, and my mother, Sarah, grabbed the microphone. With a proud smile, she announced, after years of being of no use to this family, our daughter Emma is finally doing something worthwhile. She's donating her kidney to save her brother, Jake. The room erupted in applause, but she had never even asked me. She'd simply made the decision for me. Then, Dr. Miller walked in, holding a thick manila envelope. My father, Robert, shot up so fast his chair crashed against the wall. He already knew what was inside. And what the doctor said next shattered my world. Let me take you back. It all started when I was 10 and Jake was 7. Jake was first admitted to the hospital, and I remember being in the kitchen that smelled of burnt coffee and the jasmine soap my mother kept on the windowsill. Mom was crying into a dish towel, not for me, but because of Jake's first kidney panel results. She'd been on the phone all morning with the hospital, the insurance company, and her sister, Aunt Lisa, who brought over a casserole that no one ate. Then she looked at me. Honey, some people are born to take care of others. That's a gift God gave you, she said. Her voice was so warm, the kind she used for important speeches. I wanted to ask what gift God had given Jake, and what would be left for me after all the giving. But her eyes were wet, her mascara running, and I was just a 10-year-old kid, and I couldn't break free from her words. My father, Robert, was a banker. He was quiet, more at ease with numbers than with people. He'd drive me to every annual check-up without fail. He'd sit in the waiting room, reading the same tattered finance book, flipping pages until they called my name. I thought that was love, that just showing up was enough. That night, I washed the dishes in the sink, Jake's sippy cup, cereal bowls, and a coffee mug with a faded logo. I dried each one and put it back in its place. As I got older, a pattern emerged. Mom would tear me down in public, and Dad would come to me later and smooth things over just enough to keep me from leaving. When I was 16, at Thanksgiving, Mom stood at the head of the dining table and told Aunt Lisa, Grandma Rose, and other relatives that I was going through a difficult phase because I wanted to spend Christmas with a friend's family. Not like Jake, she said, touching Jake's shoulder possessively. Jake fights, Jake tries, but Emma, we're family, and family shows up. I put down my fork and went to my room. 14 minutes later, Dad came in. He sat on the edge of my mattress and stared at the wall. She's frustrated, he said flatly. She doesn't mean it. I noticed even then that he never said she was wrong. He just said, just give her time. She'll come around. I nodded, and he squeezed my shoulder with the same pressure every time, like a well-calibrated machine, and left. I believed him and stayed. When I was 20, I got accepted into a nursing program in Paris, a 2-year exchange with full funding. I held the acceptance letter in the same kitchen where Mom had cried about Jake years ago. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. But that evening, Dad found me. He leaned in the doorway, folded his arms, and said, Your mother can't handle Jake's appointments alone. I need you here, Emma. You're the only one she listens to. I called Paris that Friday and declined the placement. Dad stood in the hallway while I made the call, his face blank. When I hung up, he said, You did the right thing. I thought he was proud of me, but now I know it was just relief. I enrolled at a local college and specialized in critical care nursing. I was good at it, not because I was brilliant, but because I'd been trained to handle other people's emergencies without a blink. I graduated second in my class, but Mom didn't come to the ceremony. She said Jake had an appointment. Dad came, but he clapped politely, like he was at a school play for someone else's child. I moved into a small apartment close to home so I could be there for Jake's appointments. I started working night shifts at Ridgeway Memorial, 12-hour shifts that left my back aching. Last Tuesday, I was in the middle of a shift when Mom called. "We're having a little gathering for Jake at the chapel," she said brightly. "Just family. It's for prayers and support." I hung up and called Aunt Lisa. She said, "Your mom told us you'd agreed to donate. We're all coming to support you." But I hadn't agreed. I drove to the chapel at St. Michael's Hospital. It was smaller than I expected, with 12 rows of folding chairs on a beige carpet, a portable lectern near the altar, and a banner that said "Bless this family" in gold letters. Mom had pinned up family photos: Jake at 8 with a soccer trophy, his first communion, my parents' wedding, and a group shot from Grandma Rose's 70th birthday. Everyone in the photos had dark eyes, while mine were hazel. Mom always said I got them from Grandma May, who died before I was born. Mom spotted me at the entrance and rushed over. "There she is, our brave girl." She hugged me, but it felt more like she was repositioning me. "Everyone took time off work for you and Jake. Don't make this about yourself," she whispered. I sat in the front row center, facing the microphone like a defendant in a courtroom. Before Mom started speaking, I noticed her phone on the chair next to me. The screen was lit with a text to Jake that said, "Dad handled the tests. Results are fine. Don't worry, sweetheart." Dad was a banker, not a doctor. What did handled mean? And if the results were fine, why had he kept all my medical files in his briefcase for so long? Mom took the microphone and started talking about Jake's long-standing kidney problems. She said God had given us a way forward, meaning me. "After all these years, our daughter is finally doing something useful," she said, and a few people laughed nervously. The word useful hung in the air. It was the same word she'd used for me since I was 13, when I was scrubbing dishes after Thanksgiving and she told Aunt Lisa, "At least Emma is useful in the kitchen." I stood up, and the laughter stopped. Mom's smile froze. "Honey, sit down." "I'm not finished," she said. I sat down, but something inside me stood firm. Dad touched my shoulder and guided me into the hallway. "She doesn't mean it like that. She loves you in her own way," he said. I waited for him to say I didn't have to do this, but all he said was, "I know this is hard. I'm proud of you." Then Dr. Miller walked in with the manila envelope. "Mr. Thompson, I need to speak with you about Emma's pre-donation test results," she said. Dad shot up, and his chair tipped over with a loud crash. His face went white as a sheet. Under his chair on the floor was a manila envelope, the one he'd called a parking receipt. I picked up the envelope and opened it. I'm a nurse, so I could read the results easily. The HLA cross-match typing was incompatible, which wasn't too unusual. But then I saw the genetic relationship panel. The probability of a biological paternal relationship between Robert Thompson and Emma Thompson was 0%. I read it aloud, my voice flat and clinical. "This says I'm not biologically related to this family. Who am I?" Mom grabbed the microphone stand. "This is a mistake. Labs make mistakes." "Robert, tell them it's a mistake," she said, staring at Dad. He just stared at the floor. I realized then that she already knew. She'd known for years, and she thought Dad had been the one to reveal it. The chapel erupted in whispers. Aunt Lisa stood up slowly and asked, "Sarah, what are you saying?" Dad said, "I didn't tell anyone." I turned to leave. At the door, I looked back and saw Dad gripping Mom's arm, saying, "Control yourself now." I realized that Dad wasn't the weak, passive man I'd thought he was. He'd been in control all along. I drove to the house where I grew up. I found the spare key under the third flagstone, just like Dad had put it there years ago. In his office, I opened the filing cabinet. The first drawer had tax returns organized by year. The second had insurance documents and mortgage papers. The third drawer was labeled Family Medical. Inside were 2 folders, one for Jake, thick with specialist reports and medical records, and one for me, thin with just annual check-up summaries. I also found a life insurance policy. The primary beneficiary was Mom, and the secondary beneficiaries were Jake with $200,000 and me with $25,000. Even on paper, I was worth less. The fourth drawer was locked. I found the key inside the spine of a finance book Dad had carried around for years. Inside the drawer was a single folder labeled 1998. It was a DNA paternity test. The results showed that Dad had discovered I wasn't his when I was 2 years old, the same year Jake was born. He'd known for 26 years. All those years of annual check-ups, all those times he'd blocked my opportunities to leave, were just ways to keep me close and useful. The next morning, I went back to the chapel. There were only 15 people this time. Mom stood at the front, trying to convince everyone it was a lab error. I stood up and read the test results again. This is not a lab error. This is a paternity test, I said. Mom tried to defend herself, saying she carried me for 9 months, but I showed the photo of the 1998 test. Aunt Lisa stood up and said, 30 years, Sarah. You looked me in the eye for 30 years. Dad stood up, his voice cracking. I stayed. I raised you. I drove you to every appointment, he said. But I knew it wasn't love. It was control. Grandma Rose, who'd been silent all these years, spoke up. He told me when you were small. I told him to do the right thing. He didn't. Mom sank into her chair, and Dad sat down, his face blank. I was the only one standing. I walked out of the chapel, leaving behind the so-called family blessing that had been a lie for so long. 3 weeks later, I transferred to a new schedule at Ridgeway Memorial. I found a new 1-bedroom apartment and wrote my own name as the emergency contact. I blocked Mom and Dad from my phone, and the constant calls asking for my help finally stopped. Aunt Lisa sent me white roses with a note that said, "Thinking of you." I put them on the kitchen counter, but I'm not ready to decide what she is to me yet. Jake sent me a message saying he was on the transplant list and he was sorry for never asking how I was. I didn't reply, but I didn't block him either. I used to think being useful was the same as being loved. But now I know I'm more than a spare part for the people who were supposed to love me. I'm keeping every part of me, and for the first time in my life, the path I'm on is my own.